Have you ever watched someone get completely humiliated, and then, in the next breath, become the only person in the room who mattered? That's exactly what happened at the Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown Atlanta on a Tuesday morning in March. And I need you to stay with me until the end, because the twist in this story is going to hit you like a freight train. Let me tell you about Celeste Oduya. Celeste Oduya was 53 years old, a black woman with close-cropped silver hair she'd stopped dyeing 2 years ago and never looked back. She had deep brown eyes that always looked like they were doing math on something you hadn't noticed yet, and hands calloused from years of real work. She'd been pushing a cleaning cart through the marble corridors of the Grand Meridian for 11 months. Gray uniform, white collar trim, a name badge that most of the management staff had never bothered to read. To them, she was just part of the hotel, like the potted palms in the lobby, like the ambient music that played at exactly the right volume, like the pristine baseboards nobody looked at until they weren't clean anymore. Celeste didn't mind. She had learned a long time ago that invisibility had its advantages. The person who absolutely did not share that philosophy was Beverly Crane. 41 years old, white, sharp-featured, the kind of woman who wore heels to a Tuesday morning briefing and considered it a power move. Beverly was the hotel's director of guest relations, which in practice meant she managed the top 2 floors, coordinated VIP arrivals, and spent roughly 40% of her workday making other people feel like they were doing something wrong. She had a voice that carried. She used it on purpose. Celeste had been on Beverly's floor for 3 months. In those 3 months, Beverly had told her the cartwheels were too loud, the lemon scent of the cleaning solution was aggressive, and once, that the way Celeste folded the bathroom hand towels made the whole suite look like a roadside motel. Celeste had nodded each time, said nothing, refolded the towels. That was Celeste's way. She absorbed things, stored them somewhere quiet inside herself, and kept moving. The other housekeeping staff called Beverly the Hawk. They took longer routes to avoid her floor when possible. Celeste never did. She just showed up, did the work, and clocked out. It was Renita Fay, 28, Jamaican-American, Celeste's closest work friend, with bright eyes and a laugh you could hear from 2 hallways over, who first noticed something was different about that Tuesday in March. "They've got the whole Jasper suite locked down," Renita whispered to Celeste in the service corridor that morning, eyes wide. "I heard it from Douglas at the front desk. Some kind of major deal. Chinese delegation. Like a real one. The kind with security and everything." Celeste glanced up from restocking her cart. "Then stay off the 10th floor. Beverly's up there already." Renita lowered her voice further. Running around like her hair's on fire, Celeste said nothing. She pushed her cart toward the service elevator and pressed the button for the 8th floor. She had linens to change. What Celeste didn't know, what she had no reason to know, was the size of what was happening above her head. The Grand Meridian had been courting Huang Boxuan for 8 months. Huang Boxuan was 67 years old, a Chinese national with a quiet face and the kind of stillness that powerful people develop after decades of having everyone in the room pay attention to them whether they wanted it or not. He controlled a private infrastructure investment group based in Shenzhen with holdings across Southeast Asia and, increasingly, the American South. His company was considering a development partnership with Meridian Holdings, the parent company of this hotel, and 14 others. A deal that, if it closed, would be worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $240 million. He'd flown in from Hong Kong with an interpreter, 2 advisors, and a personal assistant. The interpreter had developed a severe stomach illness somewhere over the Pacific. By the time the Meridian's management team received that information 40 minutes before Huang Boxuan's car arrived, the situation had quietly crossed from complication to catastrophe. Gerald Ashby, 55, the hotel's regional vice president, a heavyset white man who'd spent 30 years in hospitality and prided himself on never losing his composure, spent those 40 minutes on the phone. He called the corporate office in Charlotte. He called 2 translation agencies. He called a professor at Georgia Tech who'd been recommended by someone he played golf with. Every call ended the same way. Nothing. Beverly was already in the Jasper suite when Gerald arrived. She had arranged the seating twice, moved a floral centerpiece to a different table, and was now standing in the center of the room, doing something with her hands that wasn't quite wringing them but was getting close. "Tell me someone found someone," she said, the moment Gerald walked through the door. Gerald loosened his tie. "Working on it. The car is 20 minutes out. I know. Gerald. This is a $240 million conversation. We cannot greet this man with." She gestured at the empty room, at the silent suite, at the absence of anyone who could bridge the gap between them and the person who was about to walk through the door. "Nothing. I said I'm working on it, Beverly." She turned back toward the window. Outside, Atlanta hummed and glittered in the morning light, indifferent. It was Beverly's assistant, a young man named Tyler, who thought of it. He'd remembered something. A fragment of overheard conversation from a few weeks ago, something he'd filed away without meaning to. He found Beverly in the corridor and spoke quietly. "There's a woman on the housekeeping staff," he said. "I heard her on the phone once. She was speaking, I think it was Mandarin? I wasn't sure. I thought maybe she was watching a show or something, but it didn't sound like a show. It sounded like." Beverly stared at him. "Which woman?" she said. "The one with the silver hair. Oduya, I think her name is." A long pause. Beverly's expression did something complicated. You could see the calculations happening behind her eyes, the hierarchy she believed in versus the problem she needed solved. She didn't like the math. She did the math anyway. "Find her," she said. Celeste was in the middle of stripping a king-sized bed on the 8th floor when the phone on the housekeeping cart buzzed. She looked at the screen. Internal line. "Beverly Crane's extension," she answered. "Oduya." Beverly's voice was clipped, precise, the tone she used when she was pretending not to be afraid of something. "I need you on the 10th floor. Right now. Bring nothing. Just come." Celeste set down the fitted sheet. "I'm in the middle of a room. Someone else will finish it. 10th floor. The service elevator. Now." The line went dead. Celeste stood still for a moment in the quiet of the half-stripped room. Sun through the window. The distant sound of traffic 14 stories below. She thought about the tone in Beverly's voice, that particular register she'd heard before, only in moments of real distress. Not irritation. Not performance. Something genuinely desperate. She took off her rubber gloves, folded them over the edge of the cart. She took the service elevator to the 10th floor. Beverly was waiting for her in the corridor outside the Jasper suite. Gerald Ashby stood a few feet behind her. There were 2 other men in suits Celeste didn't recognize. Beverly looked at Celeste with an expression that sat uncomfortably between urgency and something she was unwilling to fully acknowledge. "We have a situation," Beverly said. "I gathered," Celeste said. "We have a very important guest arriving in." Beverly glanced at her watch. 11 minutes. "Our interpreter is unavailable. Someone told me." A pause, the smallest flinch, "that you may speak Mandarin." Celeste said nothing. Beverly's jaw tightened. "Do you speak Mandarin?" Celeste looked at her. Just looked at her. The silver-haired woman in the gray uniform, with the calloused hands and the quiet eyes, looking at the woman who had complained about her folds. "I do," Celeste said. The silence that followed lasted approximately 3 seconds. Gerald Ashby exhaled so hard you'd have thought he'd been holding his breath since Charlotte. Beverly opened her mouth and closed it again. "How?" she started. "Do you need me to help?" Celeste said. "Or do you need to understand how?" Another pause. "Help," Gerald said from behind Beverly. "Please." Celeste asked for 10 minutes. She went to the service bathroom at the end of the corridor, washed her hands, straightened her uniform, and looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. The gray uniform, the white collar, the name badge that said Oduya in capital letters. She thought about her mother's kitchen in Guangzhou. She had been 7 years old, the first time she understood. She was different from the other children in that neighborhood. Half Nigerian, half American, raised for 6 years in southern China by a mother who worked as a textile factory supervisor, and a grandmother who insisted on Mandarin lessons every single morning before school. Not because it would be useful, her grandmother had said, because language is how you understand the world from the inside. You don't know a place until you know how its people talk when they think no one important is listening. Celeste had listened. For 23 years, she'd listened. She'd gone on to a career in international trade compliance, 12 years with a logistics firm in Singapore, 7 with a consultancy in Hong Kong, a brief position with an import advisory group in Shanghai. She'd been fluent in Mandarin since she was 9, business Mandarin since she was 30. She'd come back to Atlanta 18 months ago to take care of her mother, who was 81 and had Parkinson's and needed someone with her full time. The housekeeping job was part-time. The pay was modest. The hours were predictable. It left her afternoons free. Beverly Crane had never asked her any of this. Beverly Crane had told her the towels were wrong. Celeste looked at herself in the mirror one more time. Then she walked out. Huang Boxuan arrived at 10:47 a.m. He was a small man impeccably dressed, with the unhurried movements of someone who had long since stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. His 2 advisors flanked him. His assistant carried a leather briefcase. They moved through the lobby with the quiet confidence of people who had been in many rooms like this one. Gerald Ashby met them at the elevator. Beverly stood 2 steps behind him. The hotel's head of security stood near the door. Tyler stood near the wall, holding a tablet and looking like he was trying to be invisible. And there, at Gerald's right hand, not behind him, not to the side, but right there where an interpreter would stand, was Celeste Oduya, gray uniform, silver hair, hands folded in front of her, expression calm. Huang Boxuan's eyes moved across the assembled group with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to reading rooms quickly. They landed on Celeste. A flicker of something. Not surprise exactly. More like adjustment. Gerald stepped forward. Mr. Huang, welcome to the Grand Meridian. We're deeply honored by your visit. Please allow me to introduce our team. He gestured towards Celeste. Celeste stepped forward. What happened next was the thing Beverly Crane would replay in her mind for the rest of the week. Celeste looked at Huang Boxuan and spoke in Mandarin. Not hesitantly, not with an accent that required compensation, with the easy, natural fluency of someone for whom the language was simply another room they lived in. She introduced Gerald, offered a traditional greeting appropriate to Huang Boxuan's regional background in Guangdong, referenced the weather difference between Atlanta and Hong Kong, with a lightness that made the older man's face relax visibly. She used honorifics precisely. She let silences sit where they were supposed to sit. Huang Boxuan responded. He said. And Celeste would translate this for Gerald a moment later, keeping her face entirely neutral. That it was a pleasure, and that he was relieved to have someone present who understood the difference between language and communication. Gerald nodded, not yet knowing what had been said. Beverly stood very still. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. Celeste sat at the table, not against the wall, at the table where the interpreter sat. She translated everything. Opening remarks, questions about development timelines, concerns about zoning partnerships, a detailed discussion of infrastructure financing that required familiarity with terminology most professional interpreters would have had to look up. She did not look up anything. At one point, about 40 minutes in, one of Huang Boxuan's advisors made a comment in rapid Mandarin, a regional idiom, something between an expression and a test, the kind of thing designed to trip up someone performing fluency rather than possessing it. Celeste caught it instantly. She responded in kind. The idiom traced back to a Cantonese proverb her grandmother had taught her when she was 11. One about the difference between a stone that shines and gold that doesn't. The advisor blinked. Huang Boxuan looked at Celeste with what was unmistakably respect. Beverly, sitting along the wall where she'd been asked to wait, watched all of this with an expression that had started as calculation and slowly, over the course of 2 hours, resolved into something she had no comfortable name for. Gerald caught it during a brief recess. He leaned over to Beverly and spoke quietly. "Where has she been this whole time?" Beverly said nothing. "Beverly, she's been on our staff for almost a year. How did we not?" "I don't know," Beverly said. It was the most honest thing she'd said all morning. The deal didn't close that day. Deals like this never do. But something shifted. After the formal meeting concluded, as assistants gathered papers and advisors stepped into the corridor, Huang Boxuan remained at the table. He asked Celeste, through the conversation they'd been having, which had by now outpaced the meeting itself, where she had learned her Mandarin. She told him, not the whole story. Enough. Her mother's kitchen in Guangzhou, her grandmother's insistence, the morning lessons before school. The way she'd grown up understanding China from the inside, not as a foreign country to be studied, but as a second home absorbed gradually, the way rain gets into stone. Huang Boxuan listened. Then he said something in a quieter register, not formal, not performing. Just one person talking to another. He said that, in his experience, the most useful people in any room were almost never the ones who made sure everyone knew they were there. Celeste said, in Mandarin, that she agreed. He nodded. Then he looked across the room to where Gerald and Beverly were standing. He asked Celeste, in Mandarin, clearly not expecting her to translate this part if she chose not to, what this woman's role was at the hotel. Celeste translated it anyway, word for word. Beverly's face went the color of old chalk. Gerald looked at Beverly for a long moment. Then he looked at Celeste. "She's currently in housekeeping," he said carefully. Huang Boxuan considered this for a moment. Then he said, still in Mandarin, that in his company they had a policy about discovering talent late. They didn't apologize for it. They corrected it immediately and moved forward. He looked at Gerald as he said this. Celeste translated every word. Gerald nodded slowly. That seems like a sound policy. 2 days later, Gerald Ashby called Celeste into his office. It was a Thursday morning. She'd just finished the 8th floor, same cart, same routine, same gray uniform. His office smelled like good coffee. He'd asked his assistant to bring a second cup before Celeste arrived. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat. He told her that Meridian Holdings had a corporate communications and partnerships division based in Charlotte that had been looking for a consultant with international business experience and Mandarin fluency for 8 months. He told her the role was full-time, salary plus benefits, and that her name had already been submitted. He also told her, and he said this with the careful manner of a man choosing his words, that he personally regretted that it had taken an emergency to reveal what should have been learned through a conversation on her first week. Celeste looked at her coffee cup. Then she looked up at him. "Mr. Ashby," she said, "people see what they expect to see." A pause. "That needs to change," he said. "Yes," Celeste said, "it does." Beverly Crane did not lose her job. That might surprise you. But Beverly Crane was competent at most of what she did. The logistics, the VIP coordination, the management of a floor that needed managing. What happened was different. She was required to attend a 3-day internal training in Charlotte, the kind with worksheets and uncomfortable small group conversations that hotel management uses when something has gone wrong, and they can't quantify exactly how. She came back quieter, not different. People rarely become different people, but quieter. She stopped commenting on the housekeeping staff's technique. She started reading the name badges. Renita noticed first. She told Celeste about it 2 weeks later, over coffee in the break room, still half disbelieving. "Beverly actually said good morning to me today," Renita said, by name. Celeste stirred her coffee. "Don't overthink it," she said. "I'm not overthinking it. I'm just." Renita shook her head. "How are you not angrier about all of this? She treated you like you weren't even a person." Celeste thought about that for a moment. "Because being angry at Beverly Crane would require giving Beverly Crane more space in my head than she deserves," she said. "I've been carrying things that matter a lot longer than I've known Beverly Crane. I'm not clearing room for her." Renita looked at her. I want to be you when I grow up, she said. Celeste smiled. The small, real smile she didn't use often. Give it time. The partnership deal with Huang Boxuan closed 14 weeks later. Celeste wasn't there for the signing. She was in Charlotte by then, sitting in a real office with a real window, helping draft communication frameworks for the company's expanding East Asian partnerships. But Gerald Ashby sent her a message when it closed. It was 3 sentences. We signed today, $240 M. Thank you. Celeste read it twice. Then she set her phone face down on her desk and went back to work. She didn't need applause. She never had. I want to sit with you for just a second before we close this out. Because I've been thinking about what this story is really about, and it's not about Mandarin. It's not about a $240 million deal. It's about the way we decide what someone is worth before we've asked them a single question. Beverly Crane decided what Celeste was worth based on the color of her uniform. The rest of the staff barely registered her. Gerald Ashby himself, a decent man, by most measures, didn't know her name for 11 months. And Celeste let them. Not because she was weak, because she understood something most of us are still learning. You don't have to announce yourself. You don't have to make people see you. The right moment will come, and when it does, who you actually are will do the talking. That's what her grandmother gave her. Not just a language, a philosophy. I've been thinking about how many Celeste Oduyas are out there right now, people with entire worlds of skill and experience and knowledge that nobody around them has thought to ask about. People who have been handed a cart to push, or a counter to stand behind, or a form to file, and have been doing it with grace and without complaint, waiting. Not passive waiting, not resentful waiting, patient waiting. The kind that comes from knowing what you have. If you saw yourself in this story, if you're the one who's been underestimated, who's been looked past, who's been handed the small job when you've been carrying big things, I want you to know that someone out there is paying attention. The right moment is coming. And when it gets there, say it simply, fluently. If this story moved you, drop a comment below. Tell me who you thought of while you were listening. A coworker, a parent, yourself. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. If you're new here, subscribe to Glen's Stories. We put out a new story every week, and I promise they hit. I'll see you in the next one.